Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today for Water Now Alliance's webcast, tapping into multiple benefits of sustainable water management. This is one in a series of interactive training webcasts that are part of Water Now's Tap into Resilience initiative. My name is Lindsay Rogers, and I'm the Colorado Basin Program Manager here at Water Now. And today we're going to provide an overview of the many co-benefits associated with investing in localized infrastructure solutions, and we'll explore the Pacific Institute's framework for incorporating these multi-benefits into water decision-making. Alrighty. I'm joined today by Dr. Sarah Duringer, Senior Researcher with the Pacific Institute, who is leading their research efforts on evaluating the multi-benefits of localized infrastructure, as well as Caroline Cook, Water Now's Policy Director and the creator of our Tap into Resilience Toolkit, and Jesse Bersinger, Water Now's Database Manager, will also be on hand to answer your tech-related and other questions throughout the webcast. Before we jump in, let's take a quick look at the agenda. First, I'll briefly provide an overview of Water Now Alliance and the Tap into Resilience initiative, and then I'll turn it over to Caroline to walk us through how to use the TIR toolkit. Then Sarah will discuss Pacific Institute's multi-benefits framework, and of course, we'll leave time at the end for questions. A recording of this webcast will be available to you all on the Tap into Resilience resource library. Let's quickly review some of the functionality of this Zoom webcast. On the left is a general chat icon where you can ask questions related to technical problems. Keep in mind your messages can be seen by other attendees. Jesse will be able to reply in private to you directly. You'll also be able to submit content-related questions throughout the webcast using the Q&A tools seen here. We'll be asking a few polling questions throughout the presentation, and in a second you'll see a poll pop up on your screen. So the question is your community currently using localized distributed infrastructure solutions to address water supply, water quality, stormwater, or wastewater challenges? Yes, we've invested extensively in a localized infrastructure program. We have a few programs. No, we haven't invested in these programs, or I don't know. We'll give you a moment to respond here. Okay, let's take a look at the results. Okay, great. It looks like many of you have already invested in these types of solutions, or you have a few programs and maybe are looking to expand. That's great. So for those viewers who aren't familiar with our organization, Water Now Alliance is a nonprofit network of local water decision makers supporting sustainable, affordable, and climate resilient water solutions across the One Water spectrum. Our water leaders include mayors, council members, county supervisors, general managers, public works directors, and water agency directors, among others. These are the local leaders responsible for local and regional water management decisions. So why local leaders? We focus on these decision makers because they represent 95% of all spending on water infrastructure across the nation. It's this spending and these local decisions that have the greatest impact on the nation's water future. Sustainable is sort of a catch-all term, so we define it here as providing safe, healthy, and affordable water services for people while preserving the integrity of water resources and the environment for future generations. And we further break this down into 6 sustainable water categories that represent a critical path forward for water leaders. These include reuse and recycling, green infrastructure, source water and watershed protection, water trading, transfers, and other market mechanisms, groundwater management, and water conservation and efficiency. WaterNow launched our Tap into Resilience initiative to support cities and utilities to accelerate and scale up their investment in all kinds of localized, on-site, distributed water strategies. These options are today's untapped resources for addressing our drinking water, stormwater, wastewater, and other water management challenges. Distributed infrastructure is decentralized water management strategies spread out over many properties. It's typically not owned or operated by your city or water agency. They operate in concert with centralized infrastructure, and it's paid for or incentivized by the utility. Localized strategies can include a broad range of options, and then some specific examples include green stormwater infrastructure like bioswales, permeable pavement, and green roofs. It also can include water efficiency strategies such as turf replacement, leak detection devices, and high efficiency appliances and fixtures, or water quality programs like lead service line replacements. But are these strategies infrastructure? We say yes. The reason is that decentralized on-site systems can serve the same functions as traditional water infrastructure by improving the reliability of our water supply, managing stormwater runoff, and improving our water quality. They represent long-term investments in our system's functionality and resilience. And there are some really important benefits associated with expanding our water infrastructure portfolios to include localized infrastructure. These strategies are often less expensive and less time-intensive to implement than building centralized infrastructure. They can restore and enhance watershed and ecosystem functions to support water supply resilience and health, and they provide multiple benefits for communities and ratepayers. Tap into Resilience is, at its heart, focused on broadening the definition of water infrastructure. While a growing number of utilities are implementing localized infrastructure projects, for the most part, these projects are small and they're not developed at a scale where we're seeing significant advancements to our water systems. We developed the Tap into Resilience Toolkit to serve as an online portal to everything water managers need to scale the centralized water infrastructure all in one place. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Caroline, WaterNow's Policy Director, who will walk us through the toolkit.
Thanks so much for that introduction to Tap into Resilience Initiative, Lindsay. As Lindsay mentioned, I'll be discussing a critical part of the campaign, the Tap into Resilience Toolkit. So that everyone can see how the toolkit works, in a few moments we'll have a live walkthrough on the website. But first, let's go over the information that's included in the toolkit to put this all into context before we dive in. The toolkit includes 6 main categories of information, which are the online modules, success stories, downloads, videos, a resource library, and what we call the Ask an Expert feature. So I'll briefly cover each of these categories, but first let's do a quick survey of the group, and a poll is going to pop up here. So how familiar are you with the Tap into Resilience Toolkit? A, I've seen the toolkit and have a handle on how it works. I've seen it but have had trouble navigating it. And C, I haven't seen it yet. And don't worry, all of these are responses are anonymous, so you can be honest and say you haven't seen it yet. So we'll give everyone a moment to respond. Okay, and the results are that most folks on the webcast this morning have not seen it yet, which is great, and exactly why we are hosting this series. So let's go through some of the elements. So the bulk of the toolkit is the interactive and customizable online modules that cover over 60 topic and issue areas, including finance, tax, accounting, and legal how-tos, using mandates and incentives to motivate ratepayers to deploy localized solutions, and steps to securing the long-term benefits of distributed strategies. Generally, the toolkit is set up as 2 main modules, each with multiple subparts that we'll go through. So the main modules are, what are my financing options, which covers utility costs and revenue sources, debt financing, localized infrastructure, and accessing state, federal, and philanthropic funding. The second is the localized water infrastructure implementation strategies module, which covers ways to employ decentralized solutions on public property, not owned by the utility, as well as private property. The toolkit also includes success stories of communities already using localized infrastructure as real-world case studies on how water managers can scale investments in these sustainable solutions to meet their drinking water, stormwater, wastewater, and management challenges and avoid reinventing the wheel in their service areas. And to provide truly practical resources, the toolkit also gives access to examples of on-site reuse and stormwater ordinances, memorandum of understanding, a bond council opinion, and conservation easements, each with contextualizing summaries that can be easily downloaded. To help water leaders understand complex topics around building more effective distributed infrastructure programs, the toolkit presents short videos on topics including how to debt finance decentralized solutions, what environmental impact bonds are and where they've been issued before, stormwater credit trading programs, and why it's important to engage with utility customers on social media channels. Next, the toolkit All Resources Library provides both a quick reference guide to the TIO toolkit materials, as well as additional resources on localized infrastructure. In a few minutes, you'll hear from Dr. Sarah Derringer, as Lindsay mentioned, with Pacific Institute, who helped develop the multi-benefits framework that you can access through the resource library. And last but not least, as a distinctive part of the toolkit, we've put together a team of experts to answer water leaders' questions on tax, accounting, financing, municipal bond, and other water infrastructure topics. Through the TIR Toolkit Ask an Expert portal, this short, easy-to-use online form, decision makers can connect with these experts for pro bono assistance with community-specific questions about localized water infrastructure investments. And I really do encourage everyone to check this valuable resource out and take advantage of the panelists' expertise. So, how does the toolkit work? WaterNow's online interface makes accessing each of these elements of the toolkit as easy as clicking through the interactive modules, using one of the quick reference guides, or searching the All Resources library. So to give everybody a sense of what this means in practice, I'm going to switch over to the live website view here. And you can see that, from here, there are 2 ways to access the toolkit. First, if you're already perusing the Tap into Resilience website, as I am, you'd go to the Start Implementing and the navigation bar and choose Tap into Resilience Toolkit. This takes you through an introduction to the toolkit, but because we've just done that, I'm going to go ahead and click on the Tap into Resilience Toolkit link. So we're now on the main toolkit landing page. If you wanted to go here directly as a second way to access the toolkit, you can just type in the easy to remember URL of tapin.waternow.org/toolkit. So from the landing page, I'm ready to get started. So I'm going to click on that button where I'm taken to the welcome. And as I'm reading the welcome, I see that this is where I can access the toolkit modules, the quick reference library, as well as the Ask an Expert portal. Because the toolkit modules include a lot of information, for our purposes today, we're just going to walk through how to access 2 of the sections, how to debt finance distributed infrastructure, and steps to ensuring long-term benefits of private property localized infrastructure. So to access the debt financing materials, I'll scroll back up to what are my financing options, and I'm going to click on that. This takes me down the page to an overview of this main toolkit section. Because I'm interested in debt financing, I'm going to click on that. And I'm taken to the relevant page where I find an overview of the information included in this section, access to the Ask an Expert portal, and 4 additional sublayers. So to use a hypothetical example of how a water manager might use this section of the toolkit, let's say I'm a city councilor from a town in New Mexico with a population of about 100,000, whose chief financial officer has told them that accounting rules prevent their city's water efficiency rebates from being financed through its next bond issuance. As a city councilor, I'm interested, however, in increasing the amount of money my city invests in this water rebate program. So I'd like to find out whether something might have changed since my CFO informed her understanding of the accounting rules. So looking at these 4 topic headings, I'm going to say answering accounting questions that arise when using debt financing seems most relevant to my question, and I'll click on that. This brings up 2 additional sublayers, and based on the short summary and headings, I'm going to choose how to debt finance localized infrastructure as a regulated asset. An overview page opens, and I learned that there was a change in accounting rules in 2018. And I also now have access to a primer for water leaders on how to debt finance distributed infrastructure projects, an explanatory video on how this new accounting guidance works, 3 examples of communities that have used debt to pay for rebates or other localized solutions, another access point for the Ask an Expert portal, and links to additional resources in the library. Given my hypothetical scenario as a New Mexico city councilor, the primer link is particularly interesting to me, so I'll scroll back up and click on that. So I'm taken to a resource page in a new window. And I'll note here that all of the links within the toolkit modules are specifically designed to take you to a new page so that you can always get back to your place in the toolkit on the prior tab. But so going back to the primer, after reviewing the available summary, I'd like to share this with my CFO and discuss it with her more. So I'm going to click the download button. A short form pops up asking for some contact info, which I could fill out, including a password so that I can access the resources on my next visit to the toolkit. And because I'm a city councilor, I would go ahead and choose that I would like to become a Water Now member. Okay, so now that I have a resource to talk with my CFO about, I have a better understanding of what my community can include funding for water efficiency rebates in our new next bond. I also noticed that at the end of this debt financing section, there's a link to a section about localized water infrastructure implementation strategies. So I'll click on that. Because I want to grow my community's current rebate program, I'm interested in the implementation section, which is the second main part of the toolkit that I mentioned earlier. This presents 2 additional sublayers, and because I'm concerned about water efficiency rebates, I'm going to choose private property. Here there are 4 additional options. And since my Nevada town, we rely on water efficiency as a source of supply, I'm going to click on the section securing the benefits of private property localized infrastructure, as that seems most relevant. From the 2 options that pop up, I'm going to choose step 2, securing long-term benefits. Here, I'm given a 4-step process for building a water use efficiency rebate program that's designed to provide long-term benefits by creating accountability, establishing clear performance metrics, evaluating benefits and costs, including multiple benefits, which you'll hear more about from Sarah in just a minute, and defining the value of performance for my rebate program. So that is a very brief overview of just 2 of the sections of the toolkit online modules. You can access the other 50 or so sections using the same approach. And I'll note here that we really view the toolkit as a living resource that will change and grow over time based on additional materials we identify, new case studies, and feedback from the toolkit users. So to provide your feedback on your experience, you can go back to the top navigation bar, and under that Start Implementing option, choose Share Feedback. There are two ways to share your feedback with WaterNow. The first is by sharing your water infrastructure story by filling out this form. And the second is to share your feedback on the toolkit and how your experience navigating it. And again, I encourage everyone to participate in these opportunities to be part of the Tap into Resilience initiative. All right, so that's going to cover it for how the toolkit works. But before I turn it over to Sarah, we'll have another short poll. So, true or false? After seeing the toolkit demo, I have a better understanding of how to use the toolkit as a resource for my utility. True, somewhat true, neutral, somewhat false, false. Give everyone a moment to provide their response. All right, and so the results looks like the demo was pretty helpful. Might be some questions remaining about how the toolkit works, and we're happy to answer those during the Q&A section of today's webcast. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Great. Thank you, Carolyn and Lindsay. 1 second while we switch over the screen controls. Great. Well, thank you all for being here today, and I'm excited to talk to you about tapping into the multiple benefits of sustainable water management. First, I'll just share a little bit about the Pacific Institute. We're a nonprofit research institute focused on addressing the world's water challenges, everything from water and climate to corporate water stewardship and water smart cities. What I'll be talking about today is some of our work on how to include multiple benefits in water management decision making. So as you all know, water managers have a lot of options when it comes to how we manage our water infrastructure, how we manage essentially getting water to people for the things that they need and in the environment. So for example, we have things like the traditional gray infrastructure, dams and reservoirs, desalination options, and some increasing technologies in water reuse. We also have some of what Lindsay mentioned as the, quote, sustainable water solutions, things like urban and agricultural water efficiency and nature-based solutions in upper watershed protection, green stormwater infrastructure, and things like that. But we also know even within a single project or program, there's a lot of options. I'm showing here just some examples of an outdoor residential landscape program where you might be choosing between things like native plants or rainwater capture, maybe incorporating some stormwater features into there, or leak detection and smart irrigation controllers. The reality is at some point we have to be able to weigh the pros and cons of these different options and realize that some of these provide more benefits than others. So what the Pacific Institute embarked on was, how do we consider multiple benefits when deciding between these different project options? And what we did was we went through a large amount of literature and different reports thinking about when we say, let's go for this strategy, what are the benefits or the trade-offs that come from that project? We then took those about 100 different benefits or trade-offs that were identified and categorized them into these 5 broad themes. And the themes of what we consider multiple benefits and trade-offs are around water, including water quality, water quantity, and flooding. Benefits include impacts to energy, so including both energy use as well as energy production potential. People and community, so the ways that our water management decisions impact local economy and health and safety, as well as community livability. And then also thinking about risk and resilience. How does our decision impact our own utilities risk around stranded assets or potentially uncertainty in performance, but then also broader community resilience and being able to adapt to climate change. And then finally, benefits and trade-offs for the land and environment, including things like habitat and biodiversity, air quality, and greenhouse gases. So what is the purpose of actually incorporating these multiple benefits into our decision making? Well, we think there's 5 big things that happen when we incorporate multiple benefits and trade-offs into our water management decisions. First, we feel like there's an increase in how we optimize our investments in time, money, and resources. So if we're able to think about what are the true lifetime benefits and lifetime costs that we can then optimize what we're supporting and investing in. Second, multiple benefits can help with identifying opportunities to cost share. I'm going to share an example with you of a test case we're doing where 2 city departments were able to cost share on a project based on the different benefits that that project provides. Third, we see multiple benefits as a way of building community support for a project or program. The utility or the entity that's investing in this project may only be interested in either the water savings or, let's say, the water quality benefits, but it may provide these other benefits to communities that will help them to realize that this is a project they actually want. It can also help with minimizing the adverse and unintended consequences. So if we're considering what are the benefits, we're also considering what are those trade-offs, and it gives us an opportunity to really think about and mitigate some of those things. And finally, we think multiple benefits provides a way to promote equitable and transparent decisions, where we're thinking about what are the benefits, and also who are the beneficiaries, and are the same people receiving all of the benefits most of the time. So the Pacific Institute in 2017 embarked on a journey to expand the use of multiple benefits in water management decisions. And the project team for this work has been made up of researchers here at the Pacific Institute, as well as faculty at the Bren School of Environmental Management at UC Santa Barbara, and an extensive advisory group. And we've also had generous funders for this work that have enabled us to really think broadly about multiple benefits and how to incorporate that into our decisions. So what is the multi-benefit framework? So when we started thinking about what's the process we actually need to go through to get multiple benefits into decision making, it's not just about how do we evaluate each of these individual benefits and put a number on them. It's really a larger discussion about how we think about benefits, how we identify them, incorporate them. So we came up with a 4-step process, first focusing on how to get multiple benefits in at a project level. So the first step is to define the water management goals and the project options. And in this step, we're really thinking broadly about what is the actual goal we're trying to get to. Second is around identifying the potential benefits and trade-offs for each of the project options in those 5 themes that I mentioned: water, energy, land, people, and resilience. During this second step, the thing that I think is most interesting and most exciting is that it doesn't rely on us being able to quantify those benefits or monetize them yet. It really gives an opportunity to bring in stakeholders and say, what is important to you? What are your community values? And what can we potentially get from these different projects? The third step is around characterizing those key benefits and trade-offs. So what is important for the decision-making process and to your stakeholders? And can we put a metric and a number on those things in order to actually weigh them apples to apples? And then finally, the 4th step is around informing decision-making and actually communicating what we found in those first 3 steps to the key decision makers. There are some key features of the framework that we feel help to make it successful. The first is that it can address many different water management challenges. So today we've been talking more about distributed and green water infrastructure. But the reality is that many of our water management strategies, if not all of them, have these pros and cons. You know, they could change how much energy is used or how much water is in creeks and streams. And for all these different water management challenges, we can and should be thinking more holistically about the benefits and trade-offs. The framework is also meant to be very modular and flexible for different decision-making processes. So if your decision maker really needs a cost-benefit analysis, we are able to show how you bring multiple benefits and trade-offs into that cost-benefit analysis. Or separately, let's say you're engaging with a resident and their decision-making process is not based on the monetary value of different things. Maybe you're focusing more in that, in what are the benefits to their community, and they can be more qualitative. The framework also can help with incorporating equity into your decision making and into the analysis. I'll talk a little bit more about this piece of it in detail. And then finally, the framework can help support community engagement. We've outlined throughout the framework how community engagement and stakeholders play an important role in identifying and evaluating those benefits and trade-offs. So what I've described so far has been pretty, let's say, high level in terms of what the framework is. And so what we've done over the past year is put the framework into action and try to ground it into some examples and see how it works through 3 different case studies. So the first case study we focused on was advancing sustainable landscapes on commercial properties in Southern California and thinking about what is it that on business parcels is important to the property owners as well as the businesses to help encourage them to either do turf conversions or to incorporate stormwater features into their landscapes. The second case study that we've been working on is how to maximize stormwater project funding. And this has been focused in Los Angeles, where there's been an increase in the amount of funding from a parcel tax for stormwater infrastructure, and thinking about how multiple benefits can play a role in really maximizing the impact of that investment. And then finally, the case study that I'm going to talk about in more detail is around building collaboration through rainwater capture focused in Austin, Texas, and how multiple benefits can play a role in actually building relationships between different city departments and with NGOs. So diving into that case study, as I mentioned, this work was in Austin, Texas, and we had the opportunity to work with great project partners at Watershed Protection Department, as well as National Wildlife Federation, the Texas Water Trade, and with the Bren School at UC Santa Barbara. And the goal of this application was to incorporate multiple benefits into the decision-making process to help to engage with residents and with building partnerships among city staff. So how did we do that? First, that first step, we examined what are the goals and the project options. So Austin Watershed Protection Department had put together a program called the Rain Catcher Pilot Program, where they were looking at how to reduce erosive events and improve in-stream flows in a neighborhood called Waller 3, or the Upper Waller Creek watershed. As part of this project, they were looking at installing rain cisterns, rain gardens, and potentially trees onto residential properties. So you can see here a schematic that they put together of the project, where there's a rain garden in the front of the house that can capture some rainwater, as well as a large cistern, in this case 1,000 gallons, that has a passive drip line. So what's interesting about this project option is because it's more about actually flood control than it is about water supply. It has a passive drip line that will slowly release the water over time. And the idea is that this will help reduce those peak flows as well as help with in-stream flows. So the way that the pilot program works is that there's a 1-hour site assessment with design recommendations on the residential property. So a homeowner or a renter would have to want to be involved. There's also engagement with an environmental NGO that helps to streamline the design and install the rain catcher system on the property, as well as help facilitate the payment program. And then finally, there are some financial incentives that are put in place. First, around reducing a drainage charge. They're able to capitalize on existing rebates from Austin Watershed Protection Department and Austin Water. And then they've added an additional $1 per gallon. So that's essentially the setup of the program. So we started thinking about, okay, well, what are the additional potential benefits and trade-offs of this program? So Austin Watershed Protection had identified that they really wanted to reduce erosive events and improve in-stream flows. Austin Water really wanted to look at how this would impact potable water demand for landscapes. And then we were interested in, okay, what are all the other things that might come out of this? And so I have here just one example of what we're calling a mind map of different benefits that might come from even just the rain garden feature. And we did this process for the rain gardens as well as the cisterns and the potential of adding trees in there as well. What we came up with was this list of benefits in each of those 5 different themes, and started to identify which are the benefits that are most important to our stakeholders. So we engaged with the NGO community as well as residents and with the different city departments to figure out which of these are most important to different folks and how do we connect them in with the benefits of interest. The third step of the process, as I mentioned, is around characterizing those benefits. So actually getting a number onto the benefits of interest. I'm showing here an example of characterizing how much energy is used for water. So for Austin Water, if they're interested in decreasing potable demand, what's the energy that's also related to that water for water extraction and conveyance, treatment, and distribution? And we're showing here the amount of energy that you would save per 1,000 gallons of water saved, and the tons of CO2 that is also saved through that water. Similarly, we can characterize the impacts to urban heat island. This was identified by the Office of Sustainability as particularly important to them. And for preliminary results, we were able to show that properties on parcels with a large amount of shading were 4.5 degrees C cooler than properties without shading. And then we were able to translate that into what would be the change in air conditioning cost by adding trees onto those parcels. So the preliminary results are about $9 per year saved per household on energy costs alone. The final step, and arguably the most important step of the framework, is communicating this information to decision makers. We find that often for analyses that include multiple benefits, we get about 90% the way there, but that last 10% is the communication piece and arguably the most important piece. So what we've tried to do here is start to think about what are the pieces of information for different decision makers, including homeowners and different city departments, as well as city council, and how do they need that information presented to them. We've been drafting different schematics and trying them out with folks to see what resonates with them best. And here's one example from Austin Watershed Protection for engaging with homeowners to show what they can gain on their property by putting these into place. So I mentioned that incorporating equity into this decision-making process is especially important. And in Austin, this was something that we talked a lot with, especially Watershed Protection Department about how do we incorporate equity into these decisions. So within the multi-benefit framework, we don't consider equity as a single benefit, but rather we consider it the distribution of these different benefits to different people and making sure that the beneficiaries are not the same people every time, and the people who aren't benefiting or the ones with the greatest costs aren't also being impacted by the program. So we put together a series of questions that can help with making sure that we're addressing equity throughout the decision. The first question is around, are the same stakeholders receiving most of the benefits or incurring most of the costs? So connecting those benefits with the beneficiaries as well as those who need the benefits the most but may or may not be receiving them. The second question is around, can you adapt the project to maximize the benefits for communities in need? Perhaps you put them in a different location, or perhaps you include a different incentive program that can help maximize those benefits. And finally, what might prevent disenfranchised stakeholders from engaging in this process, and how can you then overcome that and engage those stakeholders to understand which benefits are of most importance to them and what challenges you may be able to address. So I've shown one application of the multi-benefit framework, which was really about putting together multiple incentives into one program and putting multiple rebates together and stacking them to help scale rainwater capture in Austin. But we think the framework has a wide range of applications. Things like helping cities to prioritize different project options, helping businesses develop their sustainability targets and then track their progress toward those targets. We see it as a strong way to help agencies build relationships and potentially co-finance projects with either other agencies or with businesses or residents. We think that this can help funders with streamlining proposal guidelines. So for example, if you could put in your proposal, these are the benefits that we need you to consider, and here's how you consider them, that can really streamline the process and allow you to actually compare apples to apples. Finally, we see this as a way of helping communities to engage in the decision-making process. We lay out in the framework how communities should be incorporated and how their feedback can help to actually improve the project outcomes. So finally, the next steps for the framework are that we're working on developing a guidebook right now for how to incorporate multiple benefits into water management decisions. It walks through each of those 4 steps and has the kind of do's and don'ts of incorporating multiple benefits, as well as providing additional resources for how to quantify some of those more challenging benefits. We're continuing to add different modules in to help with quantifying things. So right now we have pretty detailed information if you're interested in quantifying the relationship of energy and water. We also have one on urban heat island, and we're working on an additional one on quantifying habitat and biodiversity benefits of different programs. We're also working on applying the framework with partners throughout the US. We have several different case studies going, as I mentioned, and we would love to work on applying those with more folks throughout the country. And then we're also working on how to adapt the framework for programs and policy. So what I talked about today in Austin is really at a project level where we're thinking about either a single parcel or a single project type and how to put multiple benefits into that. But I think the next question for scaling this kind of thinking is actually, how do we get this in at the program and policy level so that we're all thinking about multiple benefits and weighing the true pros and cons or costs and benefits of the water management decisions? And with that, I've put our website here, pacins.org/multiple benefits, if you'd like to learn more. We have our first report up from this last April, as well as a resource library that includes how to identify and quantify some of those multiple benefits. And with that, please feel free to contact me if you have any other questions. And before I pass it back to Lindsay, we're going to do one poll. Make sure you're still all with us. Great, so the question is, how often do you consider multiple benefits in your decision making? Very often, often, sometimes, rarely, or never. We'll give you just a second to click on that. Great, and it looks like most of you are looking at multiple benefits very often and often. So I hope that these resources can be useful for you. And for those of you who are not yet considering them all that often, we'd be happy to help provide some more resources and figure out how to get those incorporated more. So with that, I will pass it back to Lindsay.
Great, thanks so much, Sarah, for that excellent overview of the framework and the case study in action there. In just a moment, we're going to turn it over to our Q&A session. So if you have questions, please submit them on the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you would like to learn more about Tap Into Resilience and access the toolkit, please feel free to visit our website at tapin.waternow.org. And stay tuned for upcoming Tap Into Resilience webcasts. To wrap up, I encourage you all to join us in April for WaterNow's 5th Annual Summit in Philadelphia, where we'll be exploring, among other topics, how localized infrastructure solutions and all of their associated multi-benefits can be implemented to address our water challenges. You can register and learn more at waternowsummit.org. And if you're not already a WaterNow member, please sign up to become a member at waternow.org/join-the-leaders. Joining the Alliance is free, and you'll have access to members-only resources and information. And now I'd like to turn it over to Caroline to begin the Q&A session.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Lindsay. We do have a few questions here. We have about 10 minutes. And if others come up throughout the discussion, just submit those through the Q&A tab. So our first question is, how do we account, and forgive the paraphrasing here, how do we account for different state tax and fee regulations and laws? The question was about California and differences with the New Mexico example that I mentioned hypothetically earlier. So I'll note that the Governmental Accounting Standards Board clarification for what is called GASB 62 that happened in May of 2018 is a federal accounting guidance. So it does govern all 50 states' public accounting rules. And that clarification does provide that all states' public utilities can debt finance consumer rebates or other incentive programs for distributed infrastructure to be installed on public property not owned by the utility or private property if they meet various requirements that the majority of public utilities meet. On the state level, there are certain state-specific laws that can be a concern to the taking the debt financing approach. The first question that comes up most often is whether what is called a state constitutional gift prohibition acts as a barrier to debt financing distributed infrastructure. And so to be able to provide resources in navigating that question, the toolkit does include a database of all 50 states' constitutional gift prohibitions with an explanation of various exceptions to that prohibition that allows in nearly all states the use of public dollars for improvements on private property when those improvements serve a public purpose. The toolkit also does include a section on state-specific tax laws. These are all under the answering tax questions when using debt layer that we went through. And I'll note too that WaterNow is working on building an additional database of state public finance laws, authorizing legislation, along with a guidance document on how you might find those laws on your own as a city leader. So stay tuned for that additional resource. And so I think we have another question that came in about what resources the toolkit offers to help address the impediment of siloed cultures among water management organizations within the community and the competition for funding among those agencies. So to help answer this question, there's also a section within the toolkit on implementing distributed infrastructure on public property that's not necessarily owned by the utility. And there are examples of interagency coordination from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, for example, as well as Boulder, Colorado, I believe, those agencies and cities have been able to navigate those types of siloing and funding challenges by developing cost sharing agreements that not only help with funding, but as well as responsibility and obligation for ongoing operation and maintenance of distributed strategies, which is often a question we hear about as well. We've got some more questions coming in here. Have we considered working with integrated regional water management regions in California? So we have not worked directly with them. We are certainly open to that. So feel free to reach out to me directly. This is Caroline, if you are interested in working on that. And I think we also have a question here for Sarah on the multiple benefits piece. So the question is, are the multiple benefits generally considered, or multiple benefits are generally considered in green infrastructure projects, but can this be applied to different water management projects as well?
Yeah, great question. So as I mentioned, we often think about multiple benefits when it comes to green infrastructure, but again, the reality is that many, if not all, of our water management strategies require us to think about the pros and cons of them. For example, water reuse may have some impacts on downstream flows depending on where the water comes from, or it may change your energy profile, those kinds of things. And I think it's important to weigh all of those different strategies apples to apples, thinking about the full lifetime benefits and the full lifetime costs in order to make those decisions more holistically. And actually, going back to the previous question on addressing some of the impediments of siloed cultures, I think the reality is that we don't have enough money to achieve everyone's goals in water right now if we do them separately and if we do them in a siloed way. So one of the goals of having this multi-benefit approach is that we can achieve multiple objectives with the same pot of funds. And so hopefully the framework and some of those tools can help with bridging those gaps as well.
Sarah, and I think the question about the integrated regional water management programs, the inquiry was also interested in your thoughts on working with them as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the IRWM in California, I think, is a great place for some of this multi-benefit work to land because, again, there's a lot of project prioritization going on with a limited pot of funding. And so it is a great way to think about what are the total benefits and costs at a community level and for the environment, and then to help with prioritizing that. And so it is something that we're considering, especially as we're thinking about ways to incorporate this into policy and programs rather than at the specific project level. I mentioned that one of the applications we're looking at is through how funders can streamline proposals, and I think the IRWM might be a place for that to happen as well, where if we're from the front end asking for accounting for a series of benefits, let's say that top 5 benefits we're interested in, that then it already will be an easier process to figure out how to prioritize those projects and maximize those benefits.
Great. Well, I think that covers it for all the questions that we've received this morning. If anyone has any last inquiries, please send those our way. But with that, I'll just want to thank everyone for attending the webcast, and we really hope that everyone has a lovely afternoon. Thank you.